Star Wars The Clone Wars is an excellent game. We're going to give you our observations based on the mechanisms, theme, components, comparisons to other games, and a general upside-downside analysis here on Legendary Tactics.
Well, let's take a look at this game. So we like to give a balanced review. So we'll offer our positives, our negatives, and give you a sense of whether this is a good game for you and your group.
Okay, so, starting with mechanisms.
Mechanisms, yes. So this is the pandemic mechanism.
It totally is. And
how did it work for you?
It worked really well. If you know pandemic, you know this game. Like at least 80% of this game. Pretty well in the bag. And it's the same.
Yeah,
same as it's the same
but it does
core
have,
mechanics.
It's familiar but unique.
Yeah,
it does have its own little twist. Yes,
it was interesting because you still have that panic when there's 3 droids in a space, but it doesn't outbreak quite the same. It's a different feel to it that way.
Well, it's funny because in pandemic it's like, oh no, an outbreak, whereas in this it's like, oh gosh, that's going to be hard to break into with the blockade.
Yeah,
and so you're right, it is a different feel, but it's still a cool like, they're digging in.
Now that said, it seemed like it was easier to go in and just clear everything out a little bit,
right?
Especially with some cards behind
mind you. In this, you then after clearing all that out, you still have to go and fight the boss.
Yes.
So there is that added boss battle, which adds a really cool mechanism.
Yeah, that was neat. And I did like having the cards having some abilities. You could actually use them for something
and reuse them.
Yes,
it's not just a one and done.
Yeah,
you cure
because pandemic, you just get I got 3 or whatever of the reds, and that's you don't. There's no advantage to having them per se.
Well, and there's special cards in pandemic like the charter flight and all those specials, but in this we have allies.
Yes.
And the allies sort of mimic that idea of you discard it and it's a powerful one-time boost. So, but I liked how they spun that into the theme.
Yeah. No, I thought it's an interesting twist on pandemic for sure.
For sure. Yeah.
Right?
Did you feel the outburst, the outbreak mechanic in pandemic, the original, is more punishing than this one?
It can be because you get the chain reaction.
Yeah.
You don't get that here.
That's right. And the thing with this game too is the map is much more compact. I mean, you can cross this map very quickly, whereas in pandemic, it's sprawling, it's huge, and so it feels like it's out of control. This is much, I would say, more of a puzzle in figuring out, okay, how do we hit all of these goals and targets in order to solve the various stages of the game?
Yeah. Now, how did the theme sit with you guys?
Oh, I love it.
Like, did it work? Did it feel like Star Wars?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for Star Wars.
Me too.
And yeah, absolutely. So I think using a familiar mechanism but skinning it this way, for me, just keeps it fresh.
Yeah.
So it's a fresh version of Pandemic in a world I love.
Yeah, I have to give them credit because it doesn't feel just like Pandemic per se. It feels like a Star Wars game using a Pandemic.
That's right. Well, and actually what I think works really thematically for it is that you're building a hand with cards that serve different functions, and you can't use them sometimes in combination, but you're sending a squad of stealth infantry to go take out some droids, or you're trying to protect yourself by getting into these armor units, that sort of thing, or you're traveling fast. So you can customize your hand and make yourself a Star Wars character. But on top of that, we also have asymmetrical powers that sort of fit who your character is. So Aayla Secura, just super great speed. And did you feel Ben felt like Ben Kenobi?
Well, I mean, this drawing 4 squad cards and then just discarding 3 of them, so you get an extra card draw. I don't know if that's...
He's like insight or something, or...
maybe.
Always getting a free, a free card out of the deal.
It's fine. You're never going to distill some of these characters into the mechanics. You just have to give them an advantage, make them distinct from the other. So I'm not too bothered by that.
Yeah, my Yoda one seemed pretty good, though, being able to move other people. That seemed like a total Yoda kind of thing. So I was like, that
helping others.
Sure. And like just the Force idea. So
thematically, I like Star Wars Rebellion better than this game, I think. Only because it's a heavier, more complex game, but that game doesn't work for everybody. Whereas I think this one could appeal to almost anyone.
I agree. And then when it comes to the components overall, what do you feel?
I thought they were great. I thought they were really good miniatures.
Yeah, they're good. They're perfect.
Well, Star Wars Black is one that I started with as a game that had little miniatures, and I love them. And they were just little wee. They're not as good as these, but I love those. So for me, this is an upgrade. And you get this whole box here of all the different characters.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so you're playing different villains, and I think the replayability is another factor there.
Yes.
Because of the components, you've got lots of choice in who you're going to play as well as who you're going to battle.
Yeah.
And they didn't skimp out on things like the dice.
Yeah, the dice, that's a
meaty
nice hefty.
Yeah.
These, the target components, those are nice, solid, quality pieces. Even like
just
down to the last.
having clear pieces is great because then you don't have to look at what you're at. Unless there's a funny sheen on
the cards are just regular cards, but I mean, even they're nice enough. They'll do. Like everything is well put together.
I feel like there's good value for your money here. It's not a cheap game, but it's under the $100 mark, Canadian dollars, and I think it hits the boxes for me that make me feel like I get my money's worth. So that's fantastic. Now, I've already mentioned a few other games that it compares to, but any other games this reminds you of?
Visually, it reminds me of Rebellion, but it's not obviously the same game.
It's much lighter. It's Rebellion Light.
Not even really.
Would you say there's
pandemic heavy?
Now, this is going to be a silly. This is going to be a silly comparison, but
heavy.
Would there be any visual or other comparison to Twilight Imperium? Or not at all?
No, not really.
Okay.
No, I'm not.
I just thought because you got the forces on the planet.
I think you have to just say it's like Pandemic. It really is. They tailored it after Pandemic, so you have to kind of call it
the thing is, thematically, it's like most other Star Wars games, but in terms of the mechanism, it's Pandemic directly. So the main difference being these cards and how they play. But
it's a fresh take on Pandemic,
it is,
right? It's a very fresh take.
So I would say it's a fairly unique style of Star Wars game.
So we've covered already, I think, a lot of upside. So we usually do upside, downside at the end. So let's just say, well, we've given lots of upsides. What are the downsides for you, Flash? What would you say?
So the big one was, actually one positive was I gave the rulebook to my son and asked him to learn the game. And he went through and did an amazing job. He figured out the game on his own. He's only 10. And so I was super impressed with that. But there were a number of issues, things where we weren't sure about how to do this or how to do that. Is that because he's a new rules learner? No, because then I hit the rule book and was scouring for certain things that we wanted. I found it hard to navigate. I just found the rule book wasn't intuitive. It was like, okay, so how is damage reflected on a character? And it's there, but there should be a category that says, if you take damage, here's what happens. And instead it's sort of buried within the text. So I found it a little bit hard to navigate. And there were some rules that weren't particularly clear. Maybe we didn't read them thoroughly enough, but either way, I often go through a rule book much more quickly than this one.
Is it that much more expensive to add an index? Like I've always wondered that with a lot of rule books. When they have you read through it, it's not long, but it's 12 pages or whatever.
That's right.
Like if you had an index and you could just look up, boom,
there it is. There it is. Pages 6 and 8.
Just give me a page number, instead of me flipping through. It's like, oh yeah, that must be there. And the other thing is that in the rules they do add the fine points, frequently overlooked rules. Well, why don't you just put these in the rules? And highlight them or something like that, and then why do you need a separate section? So now I have to read through this to make sure that
frequently overlooked because we didn't share them with you.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So that would be my downside. Nato, how about you?
For me, the downside would be, and again, maybe it was just this game or whatever, I would say that in the beginning, I didn't feel a lot of tension at all. It felt like we could deal with, like, we were running around, we were clearing out all the planets, and it's like, there's, and you were saying, oh, we're doing really well, but I was like, well, maybe, but it didn't, towards the end, yes, the tension began to build, and it was a great ending to our game, but in the beginning, I'm like, oh, this feels too easy, and I was just crushing it.
Let me put it this way, if we'd added another mission in, how do you think we would have done?
I think we would have been fine.
We might have.
It kind of came down to it at the end.
Yeah,
I don't
true.
know.
Yeah, maybe.
We were down to like no more of those.
Maybe it was just because we took the pressure off a little bit that way. But
and these games are at their best. I find cooperative games like this when you lose the first time. Because otherwise it feels too easy.
No, it did take a lot for us to win.
And that was the basic scenario. That was like the beginner introductory. So remember, keep that in mind.
Well, not quite. I think Grievous. They suggest that you start with Ventress. I think.
Oh, did they?
So we started with Grievous.
Okay.
But I mean, they're probably fairly comparable. Like,
it's probably Ventress has just an easier power to understand.
That's right. Like so we better finish off with you, Cax. Downside for you.
I don't have one. I don't have one. You know what? I've been thinking as you've been talking, and like you mentioned the rules. I know it's honestly, I'm looking at this game and I liked Pandemic. I always felt the one thing about Pandemic, and maybe that could be a downside here, is that the moves are predictable. Like it's my turn, and I know your turn's coming, and I know exactly, I know what you have to do.
That's just because you're a genius.
So basically, the almost all the moves can be pre-planned out before they actually happen, and I think that's just a general flaw in the pandemic system. Like, you can just look at the board and decide.
These games sometimes suffer from leader bullies. Fortunately, we're all fairly confident in our ideas.
Yeah.
But there's never a time where we really disagree with each other too much on the general strategy. So
I think this game would still be vulnerable to that.
Yeah,
So if you're a meeker player and there's a stronger personality in the group, and no, just go there, then you may just end up kind of following orders.
That could be the weakness. Yeah, that could be a.
But that's true of Pandemic as well.
True.
So
yeah,
for sure. Yeah. So overall, I give it 2 thumbs up.
Yeah. I think it's great.
It is I love this game.
I love it.
So I made a top 10 list of Star Wars games, but now I'm going to have to redo that list because I hadn't played this one when I made that list. So check that video out, and I'll show you where this game appears on that top 10 list.
Okay.
So
awesome.
Thank you so much. Add a comment if you've had an experience with this game. Let us know your thoughts on it. And in the meantime,
get out there,
get gaming,
and be legendary.